I don't think you'll ever see chargers on every street corner like you do gas stations. It's a different way of refilling your vehicle, and you just don't need that many. So a lot of us need to start thinking differently about electric vehicles and think of them more like our smartphones than like our cars when it comes to refueling. But the NEVI funds are pouring out to the states. Texas got hundreds of millions of dollars to install electric chargers. And TxETRA, the group that I'm now the interim executive director from, we actually started working on the roadmap for electrification 5 years ago and submitted to the state government. They're pretty much adopting our plan. And that is, first focus is border-to-border charging. Because if you're staying in your city, you can either charge at home or there's probably chargers near you and you don't really care. You don't need to worry about it. So the thing that people get range anxiety about are those longer road trips.
Joining us today is Buzz Smith, founder of the Evangelist Electric Vehicles blog. Buzz is a public speaker, former EV sales specialist at Classic Chevrolet, and the interim executive director of the Texas Electric Transportation Resources Alliance, whose mission is dedicated to accelerating the adoption of electric transportation in all its forms in the most cost-effective way to provide maximum benefit to all the citizens of Texas. Buzz has a fascinating story, and I can't wait to hear all about it as we bust the myth EVs are too expensive. Welcome, Buzz.
Thank you. Howdy, everybody.
So Buzz, you've been blogging about EVs since 2012, over 10 years now. Can you start us off with what drew you to EVs and your love of EVs?
An excellent salesperson at a car dealership. I'd been in a car accident. A guy in a big SUV was playing with his cell phone and totaled my car. And gas was about $4.50 a gallon back then. And I wish I could take credit for it, but my wife was a smart one. She goes, "What about these electric vehicles? Maybe we'd save so much on gas, we can afford the car." So we went for a test drive, and the saleswoman was amazing. As soon as we got on a back street, she goes, "Punch it to the floor." And that was the perfect thing for me. I wanted to buy that car right then. My wife didn't really care for it. She looked down her nose at it and said, "That's your car. I've got no interest in driving it." And I said, "Well, cool." 60 days later, she got one. Our inside joke is we revolted.
You have a specialty for puns, it sounds like. You call yourself the EV Angelist, where you kind of capitalize the EV part of evangelist, which is very clever. Can you tell us more about the work of an EV Angelist?
Yeah, I mean, I'm spreading the good news of electric vehicles. When I got my very first one, the salesperson couldn't answer any of my questions. And to this day, that's fairly common. But I got so excited about this car. I wanted everybody to understand what I discovered and discover it for themselves. It's like when you go see a great movie or you have a great dinner out somewhere, you want to tell all your friends about it. I got to the point my friends were like, "All right, we get it. You love your car. Shut the heck up." And I started blogging about it.
What has kept you advocating for EVs since 2012?
Well, a lot of it's just how misunderstood they are. They're such wonderful vehicles. They're so convenient. When you look at total cost of ownership, they're very affordable. It's just a great way to go. And I'm about performance. I did not buy a car to save the planet. That's kind of a side benefit. For me, it's about acceleration. It's about cornering. It's about low cost of maintenance. It's about high MPG, or in this case, MPG equivalent. I mean, those things are why people buy cars. And I want them to quit the politics. A car can't be liberal. A car can't be conservative. It's a car. So I just want people to know how great they are.
And Buzz, you're a multi-award winning salesperson, and you go through the experience of buying cars yourselves. So as you're engaging someone's looking at buying a car, what are some of the worries that they have from a salesperson's perspective?
Well, you always hear the same ones. Where am I going to charge the thing? If they can charge at home, they'll ask how that's going to affect their electric bill. They have range anxiety, so they worry about running out of electricity somewhere in the middle of the nowhere. And the car gives you so many warnings as it's getting lower on electricity that it's pretty hard to run out of electricity. Some people have, but those are the questions that come up the most.
So do people tend to have like kind of the same worries, or is there anything that's odd sometimes people worry about that's really not a concern at all?
I had one person tell me that they were worried about the electromagnetic fields around the vehicle, that it might give them cancer. Other than that, no, it's pretty universal.
That's a myth.
Right across the street from the dealership was a little breakfast restaurant, and it had 2 blank chargers in the parking lot. And they tell me, "Where can I go and charge this thing?" I said, They're all over the place. You just don't see them because you're not looking for them. And a lot of people, that may have been fairly insulting, and they'd say, I would notice something like that. Well, look across the street. There's two right there.
So, Buzz, you worked in a dealership and you mentioned your buying experience with your first EV. Can you tell us more about that experience? People are going into these dealerships that traditionally sell gas-powered cars, ICE cars as we refer to them, internal combustion engines. And now we're trying to buy an EV. What is that experience like right now?
For the most part, if you're buying from a traditional dealership, it's just dismal. And it's really not the salesperson's fault. It's the fact that they are 100% commission compensation. So if they don't sell a car, they don't make a dollar. And the average ICE buyer, internal combustion engine, as you said a moment ago, goes in and let's say they're looking at a pickup. I'd ask them, okay, crew cab, double cab, single cab, long bed, short bed, two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive. Do you want a 4, 6, or 8 cylinder? Okay, what color do you want? Let's go pick it out. And that's all we have to do. And I make a pretty good commission. Now, EVs right off the bat have a smaller commission. Then on top of that, typically instead of the ICE average, which is a person will go into a dealership on average 1.4 times before they pull the trigger and buy the car, meaning that most of them buy at the very first dealership they go into. My experience was an electric vehicle consumer will go in, visit the dealership 4 or 5 times. And each time they've got maybe 30 minutes to an hour worth of questions. So we're asking the salespeople to volunteer for a cut and pay to sell these things. And so most of them absolutely don't want to do that. People think dealerships are biased against EVs. They're really not. Dealerships want to sell anything that puts you in a new car. It's really the salespeople that resist it.
Yeah, so it's not set up for success to sell EVs right now. This is kind of what it sounds like. Can you tell our listeners if they're going into a dealership and they want to buy an EV, like what can they do to overcome that? Is it research ahead of time? Is it asking the right questions? How can they overcome that?
It absolutely is. But, who wants to go, other than me, who wants to go out there and just read EV stuff? For most people, it's very nerd-like. What I would recommend is the cars you're thinking about, get on Facebook, find the owner's group for that particular vehicle, start asking questions. Ask people, do you like the car? What problems have you had? In Facebook groups, if someone's having a problem with their car, they're going to speak up. But also, tons of people will just rave about how much they love their vehicle. But ask questions. The questions that you would normally ask a salesperson, don't. Ask those people on Facebook.
As an EV driver myself and going through that, there's a lot of resources, various different social media platforms. You can find the specific car group you're looking for, or even like a regional one. Like in Louisiana and Mississippi and Arkansas and Texas, I've seen like regional, even like Facebook groups talking about electric vehicles, talking about specific models, because it kind of gives you that regionality too. So Buzz, you're absolutely right. There's so many great resources for people to go learn. And EV owners want to talk about it. They want to share their experience. That's something we all have in common there.
Okay, so let's imagine that we've gotten past the dealer and we're going to buy the car. Like, what do people need to buy besides the car to have an EV? Is it car and a charger? Does the charger come with the car? Are there other things? Can you break that down for us?
Absolutely. The first thing you should ask is, does the car come with a charger? Know your driving habits. The reason I say that is if you're driving, and the vast majority of Americans are like this, if you drive 40 miles a day or less, you can use a 110-volt charger. Now, that is sort of like a trickle charger, for an ICE car's battery. It's very slow. You only get about 4 miles of range per hour that you're plugged in. But if you're driving 40 miles a day, then when you get home, you plug it in. When you wake up in the morning, you got a full tank again. If you do need to charge fast for that, maybe you're a 100-mile commute. You live near a big city, but you want to live far out in the suburbs to have the country life. Well, in that case, you're going to want what's called a level 2 charger, which plugs into sort of like a dryer outlet. Just think about the plug that your electric clothes dryer is plugged into. If you don't have one of those in your garage, then you're going to need to talk to an electrician about getting one installed, and you're going to need to locate a charger for the car. Now, the charger, there's plenty of great brands out there. What I recommend is find a company that installs and sells the chargers, and that way you don't have any finger pointing. If there's a problem, oh, you've got a bad circuit from that electrician, or oh, it's your charger that's bad, you've got a one-point person to call to get the problem solved. It's very rare to have a problem.
A lot of electricians are really kind of starting to specialize in doing this as well too. I know there's a lot of websites you can find certified EV charger installers, but really any electrician can do it because it's basic electricity work. Like you said, it's adding basically a dryer outlet to your garage or to where you park your car. But you also mentioned 110 volt, 120 volt charging level 1 charger. That's like any outlet you have in your house, and you can get by. If you're not charging too much or not driving long distances, you can get by with that without any additional cost to installing it.
The cars on average nowadays have about 250 miles of range. So if you can't charge at home or you don't want to invest in a charger, maybe you're renting a house and they won't let you modify the home at all, you can start thinking of, I think of my EV as like my smartphone. I get home, I plug it in, I wake up and it's charged. If you live in an apartment or a place where you can't charge at home, you're going to continue with the way you are with gasoline today. You'll probably only charge once a week. You'll access what's called a DC fast public charger, and that thing can fill up, say, a Kia or a Hyundai in 18 minutes.
Do you also recommend EV drivers to buy a mobile charger that they can keep in their trunk or something like that if they're on the go and they need a charge somewhere?
Yeah, I do that myself. I've got 2 portable chargers out in the garage that plug into the dryer type outlets, so they're very fast. But if I go into some areas of the country right now, Big Bend National Park down in the southern part of Texas is a great example. There are very, very few chargers out there, but you know what? There's a lot of campgrounds, and you pull in your big RV and you plug your RV. Guess what? It's the exact same kind of plug. So you could actually rent a spot at an RV park overnight and plug your car in. And a lot of cars these days, Tesla, Hyundai, and Kia are 3 that I know of, have what's called camping mode. And so you pull up to this campsite and it's pouring down rain, or that night it's going to be 105 degrees all night long. You can sleep in the car, run your air conditioner, run the stereo. It'll turn off the dash lights and you can just sleep in your car. In my case, the car I've got, you can even buy a bed that is custom shaped for the back of the car. And we plan to do a lot more camping than we used to do because we're going to be able to go in colder nights and in hotter days and be comfortable in the car.
Kind of side note here, I was just in Big Bend a few months ago, actually, my first time there. Probably one of the best national parks I've ever been to in my life. I was shocked on how many electric vehicles I saw in Big Bend, which is a very, very rural part of the state of Texas. Not a whole lot around there, but there was a lot of electric vehicles. I saw off-road adventure vehicles and a lot of other sedans, people driving around exploring the park. There was chargers available. Like you mentioned, campgrounds, people could charge. It was exciting to see that all down there.
What we're saying is there's always a way to make it work. Sometimes you might have to get creative, but there's a way to figure it out.
So, Buzz, on the dealership model too, you kind of mentioned this earlier. What's the initial cost of the vehicle like when buying an electric vehicle versus a traditional internal combustion engine vehicle?
Well, as of January 1st of this year, it got a lot better because the federal government now allows the buyer or the dealership to discount the car the amount of the federal income tax credit, which is up to $7,500. Now, before that, you had to have enough tax burden that you could get the full $7,500 because they're not going to pay you beyond whatever your taxes are that you owe that year. So now the dealership, regardless of how much tax you owe or don't owe, they can discount the car, whatever the full amount is for that vehicle on the federal income tax credit. So that's a good deal. It makes them more competitive in price. But even in the early days, when the Chevy Bolt EV first came out, and I think that was 2016, I did a comparison of total cost of ownership. So when you look at the sticker, they look a lot more expensive. But I did a total cost of ownership spreadsheet at work that I would show customers. And when you take in the savings on fuel, the savings and maintenance, a lot of people are surprised when you tell them there's no oil in the car. So there is no oil or oil filter. There's no transmission. So there's no transmission or transmission filter, no spark plugs, no catalytic converter, on and on, timing belts and chains. All the stuff that you normally have to maintain in a car is just not there in an EV. There are much fewer moving parts. So one thing I recommend people do is when you first get to an EV, open the glove box, pull out that owner's manual and flip to the back to the schedule for maintenance. And what you'll find is most electric vehicles, the first major scheduled maintenance is at 150,000 miles. Now, you're going to change oil every 3 to 5,000 miles. That's $50 every time you do it. There will be brake service they have to do. Very rarely do you ever service the brakes on an electric vehicle because they have something called regenerative braking. So when you start decelerating an electric vehicle, instead of using the friction brakes, which cause wear on the discs and the pads, the car uses the electric motor to slow down the car. And it's sort of like downshifting a manual transmission ICE car. You know how when you downshift, you feel that deceleration. Same sort of thing, but the added benefit is when you take an electric motor, unplug it from its power source and crank it by hand, it turns into an electric generator. Same thing happens in the car. When you take your foot off the accelerator, you've effectively unplugged that electric motor. So now the work that the car has to do to keep that motor turning, because it's still connected to the wheels, which are rolling, is work which decelerates the car, but it generates electricity and puts it back in the battery. That's why it's called regenerative. When I got my first electric vehicle, I was in the Facebook owner groups. And by the way, if you go there for advice, once you get the car and you learn a little bit about it, go back and answer questions. Pay it forward. People help you out. But anyway, in this particular group, people were saying they were getting rust on their discs because they weren't using the brakes that much anymore. And so with an electric vehicle, the brakes will probably last longer than the car. And what we found is you slam on the brakes once a year. In an emergency situation, it's going to use those friction brakes, but that'll knock that rust off real easy.
Yeah, you kind of mentioned the maintenance side. What about the cost of electricity versus gas? When people are charging at their homes, what's that compared?
Well, the electricity in Texas, where I live, is really cheap. You can get it for about 10 cents a kilowatt hour, and gasoline right now is about $2.95 a gallon. Now, in a pickup truck, you can get about 19 miles per gallon. In a pretty efficient car, you're going to get about 35 miles per gallon. And electric vehicle, you're going to get about 3.5 miles per kilowatt hour. Now, that all sounds like a bunch of gobbledygook. Who's going to be able to figure that out? But the bottom line is about 4 times more expensive just in fuel to roll that gasoline powered car down the road than it is an electric vehicle that's roughly the same weight, same type of vehicle. And it was much more dramatic for me. I went from spending about $225 a month on gasoline. I had a car that got 22 miles per gallon to $30 a month on electricity. And I still drive 14,500 miles a year.
Yeah, because I know you drive all over Texas, right? Like you're going all over the place.
So, Buzz, there's some data that we have from Aleek's partners that talk about the costs for raw materials of EVs. And in 2022, I think they were around 8,200, which had quadrupled the cost since 2020, which was around 1,200 at that time. So it seems like the raw material costs are going up right now. What enabling technologies are coming down the pipeline to kind of make this more efficient and bring the raw material costs back down for EVs?
Well, part of that is just supply and demand. EVs are taking off an increased rate of about 50% per year. Think about having a bank account that got 50% interest. You'd be a millionaire in no time. So in the case of EVs, demand is way up and it's going up all the time, regardless of what you read in the media. And because of that, those elements are tough to get a hold of. And because of the strict environmental laws in the United States, that mining has not been done here in the past. And everybody thinks all those minerals are just in Africa and they're just in China. That's not the case. They're here too. And the mines are now opening up. The Salton Sea in California has a huge amount of lithium, which is used in the battery packs. Same thing in, I think it was Nevada. They found a huge deposit. And so the mining permits have been filed for. And one of the mines, at least, has opened already. And the other side of supply and demand, demand drives price up. Oversupply drives price back down. So we're going to see prices normalize over time. The other thing that's happening is the electric motors are changing where they're reducing the amount of rare earth minerals that are in those motors. And that's going to drive down the cost of those components as well.
So Buzz, what other kind of resources should people be aware of when making this purchasing decision?
There's one thing that's huge, and I saw the presentation from Christopher Harto of Consumer Reports that just blew my mind. And this is it. In the United States, if you don't know anything about EVs, 40% of us say, I will never own one of those things. If we see one in our neighborhood, it drops to 22%. If we have a friend that gets one, it drops to 10%. If we ride in one 3 or 4 times, it drops to 10%. And then if we drive one, it drops to 4%. So the big deal is butts and seats. Get behind the wheel of the vehicle and drive it hard.
I love that. That's some great statistics that really kind of show getting people in the car. And once you get behind the car, you're going to love it.
Like when the internet came out, it took a little while for everyone to get comfortable with it. And now look at us. Can't get us offline.
I love that you brought up the internet, and this is why. Imagine back in 1995, when Amazon first came out, what were they going to sell? They were going to sell books. Who cares if you buy a book on the internet? It'll be exactly the same as buying a book in a store. Who ever thought that we would go in and buy clothes without ever trying them on to see how they fit, to see how they looked on us from the internet? Or that we'd go to our doctor over the internet and they would talk to, we would see their face. They'd be able to look, down our throat, whatever. Who ever thought we would attend business meetings while sitting in our pajamas at home? The internet brought all those things, and it's a driving economy now. It's a huge industry for this country and globally. Electric vehicles, I like to tell people, are about where the internet was around, say, the year 2000. Can you imagine if we said, oh, that internet thing, nah, I got no interest in that. There are so many industries and businesses that are going to grow up around electric vehicles. Think about one. You live in an apartment complex. It's an older one. You can't charge at home. I could go to a DC fast charger and maybe charge in a half an hour. But what if, once autonomous vehicles become more common, I just pull up my phone app, say, hey, I'd like my car filled today. A car pulls up, or I drive my car to a parking lot that is fenced in so it's secure. It's got solar canopies over it to generate electricity, and I drop my car off. And I go to the app and I tell it what time I want to be picked up in the morning, and the autonomous vehicle takes me home, notes where I went, and then the next morning, the car is sitting at that exact same spot for me to walk in, get in it, and take me back to my car that's now fully charged. It's like going to the gas station once a week, but I don't have to stay there and wait for the car to fill. I just go home. So there's no telling what sort of industries are going to crop up. The future is so bright, we got to wear shades.
In this beginning stage, people perceive that these vehicles are expensive. So we've talked a lot about the TCO kind of being the same. And you mentioned that there are some grants or tax credits in the US. Can you talk more about what's available for consumers to help relieve the cost of buying an EV?
It's in flux right now. There's been a lot of changes. One of the changes that came about with the new income tax credit is there are no caps on the total amount of vehicles put out by a manufacturer. Actually, General Motors and Nissan and Tesla lost the income tax credit for a while because they just sold too many of them. Well, that cap is off now. All those companies can still get it. But one of the things that the president put into the law was he wants those cars to be made in North America. He wants the minerals to come from North America. And so those sourcing requirements are part of it. So it's important to go out on the web, and especially to the government websites. If you have difficulty finding them, they're on my blog. You mentioned it earlier. It's www.theev-angelist.com. And on the right-hand side, there's all the government links. But you can go there and see what kind of income tax credit there is on a specific vehicle that you're looking at. You also need to find out, does your state offer a rebate or a tax credit? Texas has one that was $2,500. They limit it to 2,000 rebates per legislative session, which is every 2 years, and they've already sold out of them, so there are none right now. But you do need to find out. Georgia at one point had $5,000 in rebates if you bought an EV. A great place to find some resources on this is Plug in America. If you go to their website, they have a map, and you click on your state, and it'll show you what the state's rebate, if there is one, is, and the federal tax rebate information is there as well.
So there's a lot of money out there for people to utilize when purchasing an EV. I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the other piece, which is the charging piece. There's also a lot of money going out towards building out charging infrastructure. Can you talk a little bit more about what this will mean for the EV driver as it goes out?
I don't think you'll ever see chargers on every street corner like you do gas stations. It's a different way of refilling your vehicle, and you just don't need that many. So a lot of us need to start thinking differently about electric vehicles and think of them more like our smartphones than like our cars when it comes to refueling. But the NEVI funds are pouring out to the states. Texas got hundreds of millions of dollars to install electric chargers. And TxETRA, the group that I'm now the interim executive director from, we actually started working on the roadmap for electrification 5 years ago and submitted to the state government. They're pretty much adopting our plan. And that is, first focus is border-to-border charging. Because if you're staying in your city, you can either charge at home or there's probably chargers near you and you don't really care. You don't need to worry about it. So the thing that people get range anxiety about are those longer road trips. And so in Texas, along the major interstates within the next couple of years, there are going to be banks of EV chargers, DC fast chargers, every 50 miles. And then the next stage is more rural areas. It'll be every 75 miles on the major state highways. And we're also putting one in every county seat. So no matter what county you're in Texas, there's going to be a DC fast charger in your county seat for you to charge on. So I think that as we move forward, we're going to see more and more chargers everywhere we go. Tesla made an announcement recently that they're opening up their chargers to everybody. Now, the issue is there's three different kinds of plugs on cars. The Asian cars have something called CHAdeMO, which is phasing out, sort of like beta back in the VHS beta days. And you've got the two remaining, which is the Tesla standard. And a little egotistically, they named it the North American Charging Standard. And then there's CCS, which is the American Charging Standard.
You mentioned that we have to change the way we think and think about it like a smartphone, which means charging at home. What about incentives for purchasing a home charger? Is there anything out there?
It used to be up to $1,000 or 30%, which was ever lower, of the entire installation and hardware. So if you did have to have that electrician come out and put a new plug, it was covering part of that too. One of the changes in the new incentive laws is now only for people who live in rural areas or very low income areas. So they're building equity into this. Unlike cell phones, where the cell towers only went where people were trying to make cell phone calls, which meant first in the major cities, next along the highways. They're trying to be smarter about this. The people who are most hurt by the air pollution of vehicles are the less fortunate. The people who would benefit the most from getting an electric vehicle are those of lower income. And now that electric vehicles are moving into the used car market, you may have read recently that Hertz is putting 20,000 of their electric vehicles on the used car market. People of even more modest means can actually benefit from all the great savings that these vehicles can give them.
Let's talk a little bit more about the secondhand market. You hinted about it earlier when you're talking about people, you're on your seventh car, right? You talked about some people on their second, third car. What does that look for the secondhand market? And are there any incentives available for those drivers as well, too?
The federal incentive used to be for new cars only. Now it's up to $4,000 as an income tax credit or a point of sale discount if the dealership signed up for the program. The car has to be, I think, 3 model years old. It has to be sold from a dealer, so you can't just pick it up, in the used car ads in the newspaper. It's got to be sold by a dealer. So there is discounts available there as well. Some states include pre-owned cars in their state programs as well. Texas did not do that this time around. But that's something to keep an eye on. But know the ins and outs. You got to know ahead of time that you have to buy it from a dealer. You can't buy it from an individual. And so educate yourself on that. Again, either go to my website to get to the government websites, or if you know where the government websites are, go there directly.
And you kind of mentioned too, the technology is changing so fast, the charging standards. Do you feel like is the secondhand market, so the older cars, are they already going to be out of date? But, as these new cars come out, new charging standards?
Well, it depends on what your use case is. If you're a commuter and you don't take many road trips, or you have another car, either an EV with much longer range or a gasoline powered car that you can take your road trips in, that's still a great thing to take a look at, especially if you can charge at home. And there are adapters out there to adapt. It's like all the different VCRs in the day or computers. There's always some kind of an adapter you can put on a cable to turn a USB into a FireWire or something, So there's ways around it, but be educated on it when you do it. The one thing to think about is the condition of the battery. So one thing I do recommend is if you're going to buy a pre-owned electric vehicle, let's say it's from a used car lot that isn't associated with a regular dealership, tell them that one of the conditions of buying the car is you want to take it to a dealership that represents that brand so that they can run diagnostics on it and give you a report. And that way you have some peace of mind that, yep, battery's running fine. But realize also that most electric vehicles have a battery warranty that's 8 years, 100,000 miles, or 10 years, 100,000 miles. So check what the warranty is. It does transfer to the new owner. If you're looking at one that's 3 years old and it's got a 10-year battery warranty, who cares? You're covered.
That's good advice.
Yeah, really good advice. And we've mostly been talking about the average regular driver. What about our business owners that are considering purchasing fleets of EVs? How can they get the best value for their money?
Well, I'm not one to negotiate fleet deals or anything, but the main thing is the best deal for your money is going to be an electric vehicle. We talked about total cost of ownership. When you are done with that vehicle, there's going to be a very robust pre-owned market for it to go into. I would also recommend take a look at donating to charities. There are TxETRA's education group, for instance, which has a different executive director than myself. They actually had utility companies that had electric vehicles that were back in the day when they had 80 miles of range total. Now that after some battery wear, they might be down to say 60 miles of range. That's still a great commuter car for a lot of people. And these companies donated those to us. And we worked with charities to get them to people whose lives could be changed by getting their hands on a vehicle like that.
That's great. Okay, Buzz, we're going to move into the rapid fire portion of the interview. We're going to read you a series of statements. We want you to tell us if they're true or false and a brief statement on why. We're going to put 2 minutes on the clock. We're going to move fast to this. Are you ready for this?
I think so.
All right, Amy.
First up, EVs are expensive to insure and are becoming uninsurable.
My personal experience is that is not the case. The issue people will have, I think, is how long it takes to get, say, body work done on a car, but that's even affecting gasoline cars with the supply chain problems.
It's a lot cheaper to fill a car with gas versus electricity.
Absolutely not true. It's about 1/4 the cost.
It costs over $5,000 to install a charging point.
I just did that here and I had to have a new circuit put in. So this is the worst case scenario. I bought the charger for $250 on eBay, believe it or not. It was still brand new. And I got the circuit put in for about $600.
I need to have an elaborate garage to install an EV charger.
That is true. You do have to have at least one 110 outlet out there. So if your garage has no outlets in it, you might have to talk to an electrician.
Last, EV batteries are extremely expensive to replace.
They are. That's just a fact. It is the most expensive component in the vehicle. But have you ever blown an engine and had to have the engine replaced? Have you ever had to have the transmission replaced? But the fact of the matter is the battery will outlast the car and has a secondary market once it's used. And then once it can't be used for secondary purposes anymore, it's going to be recycled. And somewhere between 95 and 98% of the elements in that battery will be recovered and reused in new batteries.
Well, Buzz, we came in right at 2 minutes there, so thank you so much. So anyone still on the fence looking at buying an electric vehicle, what would you say to them to get them over the edge?
Well, the thing is, it's not political. It is a car. So the only way you know if a car is going to work for you is get in it and drive it. And the one thing that used to shock my customers, and I would tell them that as they were driving off, I'd say, look, don't overstress about this. Don't overthink this. It's just a car. But I would tell them there's plenty of resources out there to answer your questions. Go have fun. And by the way, they did not confiscate your gasoline driver's license. So if you've got, a 3-week-long road trip and you're going to go to Big Bend, where maybe there aren't very many chargers, no one's going to judge you for renting the biggest, baddest SUV and driving down there in that and not worry about where you're going to charge anymore. So it's about flexibility. When you go electric, it doesn't mean that you're sworn to only drive an electric vehicle from now on.
That's great. And lastly, Buzz, besides yourself, who everyone should go out and follow on socials and podcasts and blogs, wherever they can find you, we'll have that link below. Are there any other thought leaders or websites based on EVs that you would recommend to our listeners to check out?
I do recommend Plug in America. I start every morning by reading Electrek. So that's like elect and then Trek from Star Trek. It ends in a K. Green Car Reports and Electrify. I read those 3 news sources every day. Of course, TxETRA. If you join TxETRA, we'll email you a newsletter every month that will have a lot of data on that. Follow those same groups on social media like Facebook or LinkedIn. There's great information there as well. The other thing is it's not just about reading it. It really is about experiencing. And so a couple of things I'd recommend is the Electrify Expo. It started out where it was just this exposition in Austin, Texas. I think last year they were in 7 different US cities. When you go there, you can drive all sorts of electric vehicles, electric bicycles, electric skateboards, electric scooters. They have electric ski boats. Before long, they'll probably have electric flying taxis, available with these things, but you can actually experience them. This year in Austin, my wife drove a Volvo electric vehicle on the Formula One racetrack. Now they limited everybody to 60 miles an hour, but you can do some real cornering on that track and find out what the performance is about. But the big one, in my opinion, honestly, the best expo you can go to is the Electrify Expo. The experience of driving those cars is just unbelievable. And the number of cars they have you can drive. Another thing that I think is really important is check out your local auto shows, especially if you're in a big city. Later this week, I'm going to be working the North Texas Auto Show, and they have a 20,000 square foot indoor EV test track. Now, they can't let the public drive the vehicles indoors because of the liability issues, but They have professional drivers. And this isn't, driving slowly around the inside of this building. From everywhere in the show, you're going to hear those tires squealing. They have an acceleration lane. They have cornering. So again, it's all about performance. But this has been done at the Houston Auto Show. It's been done at the North Texas Auto Show in Dallas and is being done again this year, actually this week. So check your local auto shows and you'd be surprised. A lot of them are doing ride and drive events.
Buzz, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been an absolute pleasure to talk with you. We applaud you for the great things you're doing for the industry and in Texas as well, too. So thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Buzz.
You're welcome. And I'm doing this stuff just for me. I could talk about this all day. I love this stuff.
You definitely live up to the name Evangelist.
Thank you.
Have a good one, Buzz. Thanks.
Your EV Power Source was powered by Entergy. We hope today's episode has charged your interest in the exciting world of electric vehicles.
For more EV insights and resources, visit emobility.entergy.com. On behalf of the team here at Entergy, thanks for listening.